We do not need peacekeepers, so say government leaders in Burundi after the African Union announced it's sending a force of 5,000 troops. Why is the AU plan being rejected? And would foreign forces be able to stop the bloodshed? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. It is a conflict which the United Nations warns could engulf the entire region. More than 400 people have been killed in Burundi since its political crisis began in April. That's when the President Pierre Nkurunziza announced he would run for a third term in office. He went on to be re-elected in July. The controversy and crisis has caused 220,000 people to leave the country. Extrajudicial killings and torture are being regularly reported. The African Union is proposing to send 5,000 soldiers to protect civilians. Government leaders in Burundi say foreign peacekeepers are not welcome. From the capital, Bujumbura, our correspondent Mohamed Ado has more.
Scenes like these have prompted the African Union to act. The killing of 87 people, most of them civilians, last week in the capital, raised fears that Burundi is sliding towards civil war. The UN warns it's on the brink. Nodine Sibamabona says her nephew was killed by police.
All we want is peace. We're against the killing of civilians. Our president should tell his forces to target only those involved in fighting them. They should leave us out of this.
MPs in Burundi are expected to debate the matter on Monday.
We believe in our security forces, and we don't need other forces to come to help them, because so far they have proved that they are able to secure the country. So this is the reason why I find it ridiculous to send 5,000 troops in Burundi when the army and the police are able to secure the country.
It's the feeling of the African Union that the violence in Burundi must be stopped at all costs. The decision by its Peace and Security Council to deploy troops to Burundi sends the message that it won't allow another genocide to happen on African soil. The government insists there is no threat of genocide and that it's merely fighting an insurgency. The African Union can, however, deploy its troops to Burundi with or without government consent. Article 4 of its constitution allows the Union to intervene in a member state if civilians are threatened.
They cannot come in by force, because Burundi is a sovereign country. And the population of Burundi, as a population that has suffered for many years, is not going to allow that.
Thousands of Burundian peacekeepers are currently serving in African Union peacekeeping missions in Somalia and the Central African Republic. Their continued stay there is in doubt as a showdown now looms between their government and the African Union. Mohamed Ado, Al Jazeera, Bujumbura.
All right, now let's bring in our guests. In Bujumbura, we can welcome Jean-Claude, who's Deputy Spokesman for the President Nkurunziza. In London, Devon Curtis joins us, lecturer in the Department of Politics and International Studies at the University of Cambridge. And in Pretoria, we welcome via Skype David Zunmenu, who's a senior researcher for West Africa in the Africa Conflict Prevention Programme at the Institute for Security Studies. Welcome to you all. Good to see you here. Mr. Karewa, if I could start with you, why does Burundi not want assistance from the African Union?
Well, nobody said that Burundi doesn't want assistance from African Union, but the kind of assistance we need for time being is not a mission for protection or protection mission whatsoever. I think there are some other kinds of assistance we may require from African Union.
So why is a 5,000 member peacekeeping force not acceptable then?
Well, for the time being, Burundi has its defense and security forces, capable defense and security forces, and this is a worldwide proven fact. Well, we even have spare forces that can participate into peacekeeping missions if we were asked to send more. So I don't see any reason why we should be sent peacekeepers when the government is able to protect its territory and its people. What we need for the time being is maybe financial means to foster these peacekeeping operations and not 5,000 peacekeeping forces. And furthermore, I don't understand why Burundi should be, people should send 5,000 peacekeepers when in Democratic Republic of the Congo, when they're kicking the M23 out, they only deployed 3,000 people. Why Burundi? Why do they want to send 5,000?
Okay, well, you say the government is capable of protecting its territory and its people, but then we have all the incidents that I can list for you now. Gunmen attacking military sites in the Jazeera last week, 90 killed, police and military dragging more than 150 civilians, shooting some at point-blank range. 400 dead since April, violent clashes between protesters and authorities, detentions of government critics, 220,000 people have fled. It doesn't sound to me like you are securing the country.
Well, Burundi has been attacked on 11th of December by a terrorist group. And it's not the first time a country is attacked by a terrorist group. We dealt with the terrorist group like this should have been done in any other country. So now, I think, well, do you think when a country is attacked by terrorist groups, we have seen so many countries attacked by terrorist groups, but these countries have not been sent peacekeepers or protection missions.
So if let me just finally put this to you, if the African Union does send in troops, how will you view it? Will you view it as an attack on sovereign territory?
Well, in my opinion, for time being, you know, the Security Council, the East African, the African Union Peace and Security Council has issued a resolution, and this resolution is about sending a protection mission in Burundi. But this resolution needs backing from the United Nations Peace and Security Council. So let's wait for the Peace and Security Council of the United Nations to give its ruling. And maybe from that time we'll be able to tell you what Burundi. Anyway, Burundi will react consequently.
Devin Curtis, if I can bring in you, you have wide experience of peacekeeping missions. Given that an AU force would have to enter the country uninvited, how do you see things panning out?
I think that largely this was a very positive development. I mean, we have to remember that this is not a crisis that has just been going on for a couple of weeks. It's been going on for several months, and there's been a whole range of diplomatic attempts to resolve the crisis and to bring the government to the negotiations table. Largely, the government has been quite intransigent, and I think that this is a step by the AU to move things forward. The violence is escalating, and this is a step to try to pressure the government and the opposition into dialogue. One of the tragedies of this situation is that whereas for the opposition last spring, so in April and May, the protesters were largely non-violent. These were peaceful protests, but it was responded to by force, by the police. The elections went ahead anyway, and now we see that the opposition as well is becoming increasingly violent. So violence is really escalating on both sides, and I think that this was a really necessary signal to all players that that they needed to come together to in a Burundian dialogue to try to resolve the situation.
So in this kind of situation that we have now, where the AU wants to go into a country and the country, it hasn't actually happened before, has it, where the AU wants to go into the country but the country itself doesn't want them to come in. How can this develop? I mean, what is the next step? Will the AU just proceed anyway?
Well, one hopes that what this will do is to put pressure on the government to dialogue, to enter into the political dialogue, which up until now has been very much stalled. And one hopes that now the various sides will come together and will see that the African Union is serious and that they must come together to find a political solution. A military solution and the African Union proposed force, even if it did happen, these 5,000 troops, this wouldn't end the situation, this wouldn't end the crisis in Burundi. The only way to end the crisis is, of course, through political negotiations. And one hopes that this will be putting pressure on the various sides to enter into these negotiations credibly.
Okay, let's go to Pretoria. David Zumenu from the Conflict Prevention Program there. How do you read the situation?
Look, I think the situation has reached a very concerning point from the African Union perspective, given the fact that the Continental Organization has adopted almost a gradual approach to the crisis in Burundi. First of all, one needs to ask the question, what is at stake for the African Union? I think there are two issues that we need to raise here. The first one is the African Union is one of the stakeholders of the Arusha Agreement and has insisted from the beginning of the crisis of the necessity to uphold the principles of the Arusha peace agreement, which has never been the case with the Burundian government in the first place. The second issue here is we are raising the problem about the constitutional change of a government, which is one of the causes of instability of African Union and also violating both the African Union Charter, Constitutive Act, and the African Union Charter of Democracy and Good Governance, which provide the legitimacy of the organization to intervene and react and even decide upon a sanction on key authorities to make sure that the peace prevail in Burundi. And given the context, the post-conflict in Burundi, the African Union cannot stand idle, allowing government authorities to challenge the principle of term limits in Burundi, where the system, the post-conflict reconstruction still remains very fragile.
Can I just try David, can I just try and get some clarity here? What I want to try and get nailed down here is what happens next. So you have the AU saying it's going to go in with 5,000 troops and Burundi saying you're not welcome. What happens next and what is the time scale? What is the process now?
The process will begin with, if the government opposes, then the African Union will have to convene the head of state, and the head of state will have to decide whether to go or not. And 3/4 of them, 2/3 of them might need to approve that for it to happen. But given the current configuration of the African leaders, particularly in the East African community, divided and aligned depending on each one allegiance, that process might take long, might be complicated. But if all African leaders are convinced that the crisis in Burundi is heading towards civil war or even genocide, given the recent declaration of high-ranking authorities in the government, certainly the African Union will put forward its principle of non-interference or the protection of civilians to respond to the situation in Burundi.
Okay, well, let's go to have a look at what the African Union experience has been in the past and the authority they have to intervene in member states in certain cases. These include when it believes war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity have been committed. But how successful have those interventions been in the past? Well, a force was sent to the Darfur region of Sudan in 2004, but due to its small size and funding issues, it was criticised for not being able to stop attacks on civilians. The AU has had more success in Somalia, where soldiers were able to force al-Shabaab fighters from the capital Mogadishu 4 years ago, and AU troops helped restore government control on the island of Anjouan in 2008 when a former police chief refused to give up power. So, Devin Curtis, if I can come back to you, when and if the African Union troops go in, what would their role be and how would they coordinate with a government that doesn't welcome them?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a little bit too early to say that what will happen next, because as David said, I mean, the first step now is to try to get the consent of the government. If that doesn't happen, there will be a UN Security Council resolution, and also, as David said, there would have to go back to the Assembly of the Union to get a 2/3 vote in order to go in under Article 4H of the Constitutive Act, to go in without the consent of the Burundian government. So there's still quite a long way to go before that actually happens. And one would hope that the political process, which is about to be restarted, that will mean that such a situation isn't necessary. In terms of other examples, I mean, you listed various examples where the African Union has been involved, but I think it's also important to note that the African Union has a long involvement in Burundi. In fact, the peacekeeping mission in 2003, 2004 was the very first African Union peacekeeping mission. Now, of course, that did have the consent of the transitional government of Burundi at the time, but without that force, and that was a force of just over 3,000 people. Without that force, Burundi would have never had the peace process that it had, and without actually regional, the regional involvement in terms of brokering the Arusha peace agreement that led to the end of the civil war in Burundi, the civil war wouldn't have ended. And so I think the region has a lot at stake here. This isn't the first time they've been involved in Burundi. This is something, the peace process of Burundi and the Arusha agreement is something that the AU and the region more generally is justifiably very proud of, and so I think that they do see that they have a big stake in this.
Okay.
And I think that Burundi also, it's important symbolically for the African Union. It shows that the African Union isn't going to stand by and let any kind of mass atrocities happen.
Okay. Well, Jean-Claude Carreau, Deputy Presidential Spokesman, one way to resolve this, the best way to resolve this, is through dialogue, of course. There's fighting parties due to meet on December the 28th, I understand, in Uganda, but the government has refused to participate in previous talks. Will the government take part in the next set of talks?
The government of Burundi is ready to talk to anybody, but we want to make it clear that there are some people who cannot be convened and talk with the government. Among these people, we can enumerate the terrorists, the coup plotters. But anyone who wants to discuss the current issues in Burundi, except coup plotters and terrorists, we are ready to talk to them. But what I want to stress here is that the international community should give a chance to dialogue, should give a chance to peace in Burundi. People should not anticipate sending a protection mission or troops in Burundi until the dialogue has not failed. In my opinion,
that protection mission would be all about that protection mission. Forgive me, would be all that protection mission would be all about keeping the peace so that a dialogue can continue, because a lot of people are dying in the meantime.
So how can you organize a dialogue when people are fighting? Suppose that peacekeeping mission is not welcomed by the Burundian government. Then people are complaining that in one day 87 people can die following a terrorist attack. But if you send 5,000 peacekeepers in Burundi and that they are not welcome, you can even have more than 500 people dying in one day. So it cannot be both ways. No two ways about it. It's either dialogue or war. That's it.
David Zunwenu, in Pretoria, the UK Minister for Africa, James Dudridge, said that military intervention right now is like jumping from A to Z, and he says that dialogue is really the only solution.
No, definitely. I think the military intervention is actually, I think for African Union, it's still a project, but really it's also a way of putting pressure on key stakeholders in Burundi to engage in dialogue, to revive dialogue, and to have sincere dialogue to make sure that they find the solution to what is happening in Burundi, to see how this crisis can be managed peacefully and how to preserve the life of the civilians. You mentioned earlier in the introduction that the crisis has already sent to refugee camps at least 230,000 people, and while many more have been killed. And recent declarations by key political actors, but the exile of journalists and the fear in which people are living are raising concern in Addis Ababa, forcing the African Union to act in order to preserve what has happened in Rwanda in 1994, and not to have that on its consciousness. But definitely, if a situation gets out of hand and Burundi has to relapse into instability or into armed conflict, certainly the African Union has a responsibility to respond, and I think the leaders will act accordingly.
Right, Devin, we're saying that this is an effort to put pressure on it and should put pressure on the Burundi government, but they seem to be standing firm. So is anything going to be yielded from this?
Well, we'll have to see. It's very hard to tell. At various points in this crisis, pressure has been placed on the government, and the government has not responded. And so it really is an open question as to whether or not the government now will credibly join these negotiations. But one hopes that with this signal that the government will see that options now are limited.
And I hesitate to get into this because it is so complicated, but it is crucial to get into it because of how it's all involved. All the neighbouring countries are involved, and those political divisions amongst neighbouring countries are important too. Uganda and Kenya on one side, Rwanda has strained ties with Burundi, of course. Tanzania non-committal. What part can the regional players now play to hold down this overboiling pot, if you like?
I certainly think that it is important to keep in mind the regional dynamics, and that's why in terms of the composition of any force, it would be important for that force, I think, not to include, for instance, Rwandan troops, because I think that could aggravate the situation. So it would have to be troops that were coming from perceived more neutral countries. The regional dynamics were such that I think this was one of the problems that we saw last spring. Last winter, it looked as though there was some kind of consensus, a unanimous consensus around Africa and the world, really, that Nkurunziza should not be able to run for a third term. Then sort of various divisions in the region started to show, and that meant that the government went ahead with the elections despite quite a significant opposition regionally and internationally, and within Burundi, of course, as well.
Okay, Mr. Karowe, on Thursday, the High Commissioner for Human Rights said that the violence that we're seeing in Burundi contained echoes of the 12-year civil war, which we've been alluding to already, which killed 300,000 people. And he says that Burundi is at a bursting point on the very cusp of a civil war. Will you allow a human rights mission of experts to enter the country and report on what's going on, as the Council agreed to do on Thursday?
First of all, I want to say that Burundi is peaceful. If you want to know about Burundi, people should refrain from Googling information on Burundi. People should not rely on some press releases written by people who have not even been to Burundi. If you can ask Jamal Ben Omar, who is Under Secretary General of Ban Ki-moon, who recently visited Burundi, or an African Union mission of the African Union Pan-African Parliament, which visited Burundi a few days ago, they will all tell you that Burundi is peaceful at more than 98%.
But that's not the story we're getting out. As I listed at the top of the program, 400 people dead, 90 killed last week, people being shot in the head at point-blank range. It's not what we're hearing at all.
Yeah, it's true. But how many people died in France a few days ago? Did you send any mission for inquiry? Did people suggest any protection mission to send any protection mission to Paris? So, if people want an inquest or an inquiry in Burundi, you can send any reporter. You can send fact-finding committees. People can come on the ground to see firsthand what's going on. The Burundian government has nothing against people coming to establish facts vis-a-vis of what is going on for the time being.
Okay, Mr. Zunmeda, we've run out of time, so the last word to you. There's no question there has to be a resolution, not mainly, of course, for the sake of the people, but not only that, the sake of the economy. The country itself is just imploding, isn't it?
No, definitely. I think the reports about the dead, the shooting targeted assassinations are not generated by Google. These are facts and realities from the ground in Burundi. And I think these are raising concern at the EU, at the UN, at the African Union, at Addis Ababa, and in the region itself. But there's a problem that we need to face here. The third-term debate is a highly contentious issue. It can lead to peaceful exit of the president, but can also generate extreme violence, which the African Union and international partners, African leaders, are not prepared to accept. And that's why all needs to be done to revive dialogue and to give a sense and strategy to that dialogue, for dialogue to produce something that can hold the fragile gains that Burundi has recorded over the past few years during its post-conflict reconstruction.
Okay. And with that, we'll have to leave it. We've run out of time, but thank you to my guests, Jean-Claude Carrera, Devon Curtis and David Zoon-Menu. Thanks very much indeed. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programme's page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or just tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and all the team here, it's goodbye for now.